deputies and senators of the Congress of the nation, governors, ministers of the Supreme Court,
diputados y senadores del Congreso de la Nación, gobernadores, ministros de la Corte Suprema de Justicia,
of justice, embassies, esteemed members of the national cabinet, and all the Argentines
todos los argentinos que nos están
who have been listening to us from their homes, good evening. I also want to make a very special greeting because today in this house we are honored
muy especial porque hoy en esta casa nos honra el
by the highest representative of the history of Argentine liberalism, Dr. Alberto Venegas Lynch, son.
hijo. Gracias.
Thanks you, teacher, thank you. Today we are gathered here in compliance with Article 99 of the National Constitution to
Hoy estamos aquí reunidos en cumplimiento del artículo 99 de la Constitución Nacional para dar cuenta del
take into account the state of the nation and start a new period of ordinary sessions of this Honorable National Congress, being the third inauguration of ordinary sessions of our mandate.
ordinario de nuestro mandato.
I would like to invite you all to remember where we came from and thus be able to understand
Y así poder entender a dónde
where we are going and why this year in the Congress will be so important.
tan importante. Hace
Only 2 years ago, Argentina was in a situation of terminal crisis.
terminal,
The continuity of our union as a country was at
el
stake.
país estaba en juego. La herencia
The inheritance showed us the combination of the three worst crises in the Argentine history. A monetary imbalance that doubled that of the previous one to the roller coaster of 1975. During the government of Isabel Perón, a central bank in collapse,
un banco central en quiebra,
even in worse condition than the one that Rollo Funson had prior to the hyperinflation of 1989. And as if all this were not enough, worse social indicators than 2001,
a lo del 2001. Un
a combo that would have turned us into Venezuela. That is, 2 years ago we were trapped without a way out in an eternal present that
un eterno presente que destruía nuestra
destroyed our faith and that of our children. 2 years ago we were resigned to always repeat
a repetir siempre los
the same mistakes for the greed, laziness and cowardice of our politicians as always.
políticos de siempre.
Those who always have the formula to eradicate all evil and who have always failed.
Siempre fracasaron. Sin embargo,
However, today we look forward to the future with hope.
futuro con esperanza. Hoy
Today we know that there is a way forward and we know that it is possible to take it.
posible tomarlo. Hoy estamos
Today we are doing things that have been pending for decades.
hoy
Today we have not only stopped feeling like losers,
perdedores, sino que además
but we also know that we can make Argentina great again. Today, only in a few weeks, in what has been one of the most productive,
hoy, tan solo en unas pocas semanas, en lo que ha sido uno de los periodos de sesiones extraordinarias
extraordinary sessions in our history and fulfilling all the promises of campaigns made in 2005,
hechas en 2005,
we can say, 1, we have approved the first budget without a tax deficit.
uno, hemos aprobado el primer presupuesto sin déficit fiscal, libre
Free of default in 100 years.
años.
That is, it ended the immoral neglect of the account of our party
Que le pasaba la cuenta de nuestra fiesta
and future generations without the possibility of being defended by the vote.
con el voto.
We ended up with a monetary emission that was used to finance a tax gap,
Descalabro fiscal y
and whose result was a growing inflation that hit the most vulnerable.
los más vulnerables.
And all this, not only did we do it without raising taxes,
Impuestos, sino que además
but we also lowered them by the equivalent of 2.5 points of the GDP.
y esto
And we did this because we not only believe that taxes are robbery,
son un robo.
but because in addition the adjustment had to be done by politics.
La política.
He could also shout, because I am the president of you, even if he don't like it. He could also shout, because I am the president of you, even if you don't like it.
Ustedes también podrían...
You could also shout because I am the president of you, even if you don't like it. You could also shout because I am the president of you, even if you don't like it. T. Repassed a law of tax innocence.
Sancionamos la ley de inocencia fiscal.
No, you can't applaud because you have your hands daisy in other people's pockets. Freedom, freedom, freedom. Come on, continue with the operations that I will go after when you fall into justice for lying. See, we passed the law of tax innocence, where after years of looting of politics, where the taxpayer was guilty until the opposite was proven. To date, we have reversed the atrocity, and the Argentines have become innocent again until the opposite is proven. We reformed the juvenile penal law, thus modifying an obsolete penal regime that already had 45 years of authority. 3. We reformed the juvenile penal law, thus modifying an obsolete penal regime that already had 45 years of authority. Antiquity. Because, as we have said before, being in government, and we have carried it out in the events of Dr. Boric, the full Minister of Security, and now Senator, the one who does them pays them. Freedom, freedom. This is how it is, because without order and without justice there is no possible future. No one can think about building their future if they do not respect the law, freedom and property. Ignoramuses, social justice is a robbery. It implies unequal treatment before the law and is preceded by a robbery. Thieves, criminals, that's why they have their prey. We want the truth. We want the truth. Also 4, we approved the law. Yes, continue with the operettas that people know. They know that they are liars. They know that the speeches are false. They know that the one who declared. The police said it was a lie, but he still lied to the people. He still lied to the people in situations where they don't have the raw materials. Come on, keep lying. Bank of thieves, bank of crooks. That's why their leader was arrested. And he will continue to be arrested for the cause of the notebooks. He will continue to be arrested for the memorandum of Jad. He will continue to be arrested for what he did with Violidad. Because he is a crook. Because they were the biggest crooks in history. President, President, President. Door. We approve the labor modernization law, a law that comes to remove a delirium sanction 50 years ago. A law that was based on 80-year-old cave ideas, and that left half of the workers in the informal market. This is it. The champions of the rights of the workers left without any kind of right, half of the workers. And that, apart from the fact that they left their last government with a situation in which 30% of the former workers were poor. In addition, this law will allow the labor market to be in line with an economy that is witnessing the greatest transformation in history. Are they allergic to data? Unemployment has gone down. Dedicate to reciting poems and talking about data? No, because they know nothing about that. Thanks you. How interesting that in Congress I am part of my rock band. The presidential band. Stop looking in the mirror, Martinez. The crooks are you. The crooks are you. So failure came to the president. How interesting. Finally, this week we became the first country in the region to promulgate the Mercosur Union-European Agreement. Behind this advance is our conviction that trade, due to its effect on competition, results in an elevation of quality of life, since it is what allows us to access goods of high quality at a better price. In addition, we achieved an agreement with the United States of America, after 21 years of that famous self-sabotage that has been tragically celebrated by our leadership. It still echoes in our minds the voice of Hugo Chavez saying,
aún resuena en nuestras mentes la voz de Hugo Chávez diciendo, Alca, Alca, al carajo. Y después nos quieren convencer que no nos llevan a Cuba camino a ser Venezuela también en el...
Also in the media. That is why, after decades of losses and generations that have seen how their children lived worse and worse, we have come to determine that this decadent misery ended from now on and by the will of the Argentines. That is how they express it in the polls. We have the strength to start a new chapter in Argentine history. A change of time that can be summarized in a central concept. That is the one that guides our behavior. And that is the conceptual core of what I want to talk to you about today. In this opening of a new period of ordinary sessions of our National Congress, morality as a state policy. I want to be clear on this. In our vision, there is a clear order of merit. Come on, the fascists are socialists who understood that the way was not violent. At least I am less rude and I want to study. Moreover, in a book called The Doctrine of Fascism,
libro que se llama La Doctrina del Fascismo,
these sinister leftists said,
siniestro decían,
nothing outside the state, everything inside the state, and nothing against the state.
y nada contra el Estado. ¿Qué tiene que
What does
ver
that
con
have to
eso?
do with me?
Tiene que ver
It
con
has to
usted.
do with you. You were inspired by fascists.
¡En un fascista!
First read the books, then tell me everything you want.
Primero agarrá los libros, después decime todo lo que quieras.
I want to be clear on this. In our vision, there is a clear order of merit.
Quiero ser claro en esto.
In the first place, there is ethics and morality based on Western values.
En primer lugar,
This is the Greek philosophy, the Roman law,
los valores de Occidente. Esto
the
es
rectitude of the Stoics and the Jewish Christian values.
el derecho romano, la rectitud de los estoicos y los valores judeo-cristianos.
So that each of our actions is above all fair and just,
De modo tal que cada una de nuestras
in the sense of a piena.
sea sobre todo
This is,
justo en el
justice is the
sentido
constant
cristiano.
and persistent will to grant each one his right.
Esa es la constante y persistente voluntad.
This is the intention of giving each one what is theirs,
Esto es la intención
what
de dar
corresponds
a cada
under the
uno
precepts
su
of rights,
lo que
which are to live honestly without harming anyone.
que son el de vivir honestamente sin causar daño a nadie.
In second place, there is economic efficiency.
En segundo lugar, ubicamos la eficiencia económica.
In second place, there is economic efficiency.
Económica.
And finally, in third place, there is political utilitarianism.
Político.
In this sense, when a policy is fair,
Política es justa, estos
these three elements will be aligned,
mientras que cuando
while when it is intention,
eso será
that will be an example that said policy is unfair. That this radical change does not occur in the void. We do not take the reins of the country in normal conditions, but we had to face the stabilization of a society at the brink of destruction. Our national currency had been destroyed by the unbridled emission of money, an inextensive history of sovereign defaults, the lack of investment, product of instability and legal insecurity, destroyed companies and jobs every year. Lion girl, look at the numbers. I understand that you see and not add, but go and look at the numbers. I tell you that the unemployment rate fell, despite the increase in the supply. It means that the jobs increased more than the supply increased. What again, it would be fun to be able to debate with you if you knew something.
Sería divertido poder debatir con ustedes si supieran algo.
Well, what can I expect from you? That in the last government they issued 28 points from their GDP, 3 in the last year to win an election. Poverty, poverty, poverty. At the same time, poverty and the suffering reduction, driven by exorcism, made our streets a bloodbath. And poverty did not stop growing, even if it was tried to make up with social plans and public employment that made the problem worse. That is, we received a failed state in all areas. They're very picturesque. Crime and homicides were increasing, and the streets were no man's land in the neighborhoods, and of the picketers in the cities. To aggravate the situation, these pickets were financed with money from social assistance that should be given to the most in need. Our borders were safe, which served as a perfect crop stock, so that drug trafficking erupted in our society, just as it happened in Rosario. As a country, we did not know who entered. We did not know who left, and that is why the worst entered and our young people lived. In terms of human capital, we had a camouflage poverty with price controls that hit 57%, for 7 out of every 10 poor children, and a large majority of school graduates who did not know how to read or write, nor to do simple math. In the world in which it advances every day, in giant steps with artificial intelligence, the state and state companies were used as endurance of militants. His purpose was none other than to camouflage the ability to create genuine jobs, a product of high tax pressure and an anachronistic labor law. As a result, the vast majority of state companies were deficitary and had to be sustained with taxes and monetary emissions. Also, the state was taken by an inexhaustible web of regulations that suffocated the free market. And behind each one of them, there was someone stealing from the Argentine, overpriced forced services, or unpaid fines. In some cases, as sluggish as the import license system, through which the friends of power could have a profitable business by importing the type of official change and selling the parallel. That is why it is not surprising that there are sinister people, and some of them coupists, who, in the name of the defense of the national industry, under the pattern of a package nationalism, defend protectionism and capital controls with a consequent exchange gap. This is it. This is embracing the Argentine flag with the sole intention of stealing from the good Argentinians. We had a justice stagnated, a success of politicization, with vacancies and a huge number of federal judges and dormant causes since years ago. The misunderstood policy of all this continued to be spent as if there were no tomorrow. To shade friends, this reached the peak of madness with the 18 ministries with which the previous government counted when they left, because before they had 23, very communist. And in international matters, our political structure did not serve to generate any commercial relationship that would open markets to the Argentinians. We were isolated, lonely and fearful of the rest of the world. And that is why our economy was poor and fragile. And as if all this were not enough, the fiscal service was pursuing everyone and each one of the good Argentinians as if they were drug traffickers, for making a transfer or for wanting to cooperate, to buy dollars that today they buy freely. And the truth is that I could stay until the inauguration of next year, enumerating the critical sectors that the previous administration left. I prefer to focus on what we've done to solve it and what we have left to do. There was only one way to cut the Gordian knot. That meant its hereditary disaster, and it was stabilizing the economy. The most urgent aspect was the inflationary collapse that had us at the gates of hyperinflation, and the rate of the inflation was the monetary mission that derived from the fiscal deficit. That is why in our first month, we eliminated a fiscal deficit of 5% of the GDP and a single cut. Thank you very much to the best Minister of Economy in the world, twice in a row, Toto Capito. Thank you. In addition, we did not do this, not by increasing taxes, as populists always suggest, that by cutting spending. During 2024, we reduced the primary spending of the national state in real terms by 30%.
Durante 2024 redujimos en un 30% el gasto primario del Estado Nacional en términos reales.
From the side of the central bank, we focused on recomposing its patrimonial situation so that the Argentinian pesos has support. In this line, we managed to eliminate, in just 6 months, the fiscal deficit that rose to 10% of the GDP, and we started the process of recomposing reserves, in spite of the fact that we had to reduce the budget of the central bank, despite the fact that we had to pay all year debt in dollars cash due to the lack of access to international credit markets. Thank you, Santiago Bossoli, for saving us from hyperinflation. Thank you, Pablo Corna, for such an institutional design that we stabilize economies without expropriating, without making a board plan, without press controls, without repression, without the need to make a board plan. It seems you could go or continue reciting or saying things with meaning because he left a gap of 300%. That is not to be evaluated. You have evaluated it. We are sincere about the disaster that you left. Thank you. You will not like this part either. God bless you, merits. Doctor. Insecurity. After the implacable action of Dr. Boric, we have promoted legislative reforms such as the anti-mafia law, the registry of genetic data, and the law of reincidence and reiteration and unification of condemnations to cope with this flag, along with the better action of the Banders Plan and the anti-mafia protocol. We are all united. 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 After we pass the drawing version, so that you understand, thanks to this, we have managed to lower the rate of homicides by 17%. At the national level, we have reduced by 65% the homicides in Rosario, and only in 2025, we have achieved a reduction of 20% in robberies, the lowest value in recent history, without counting the quarantine period. In the same way, we are putting order in the border, where the knockers came and went at their own will. And as we promised in the campaign, we have finished with the pickets once and for all, which went from 9,000 to 0 per year. The letter was done in conjunction with Minister Petovalo and the entire Human Capital Ministry. Thanks to this, we have increased the discretionary transfers to take out poll tax, business and social assistance, and we have increased the automatic transfers so that the most vulnerable receive those resources. Telly, without a doubt, there is hardly an example that shows in a better way what Bassett calls the poor sand of politicians. Stealing is wrong, but stealing from the most vulnerable, right from the mouth, by making them slaves, to crush power, exceeds any adjective that can be found in the dictionary. Thus, thanks to the reassignment of parties, the all increased by 492.9% with respect to the value inherited in 2023. We have incorporated 600,000 children into the AUH. We have increased by 137.5% the food supply. We have increased more than 500% the first child, and we have increased by more than 1100% the first child loan. However, you are used social plans to steal from people with intimidation and condemn them to poverty and made them slaves. What are you talking about? If he did not even know how to, but yes, you are hiding behind the just causes a lot of delinquents so that in that way, then they not touch the ropes. Delinquents leave. Kickers, 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 kickers. Kickers, I'm going to let you know something. Kickers, you know what? I love to tame them. I love to make them cry, and the vast majority loves to see them cry. However, we understand that.
Sin embargo, entendemos que los
The social plans are not a background solution, but a transition. That is why we are also reforming the initial and primary education to ensure basic knowledge and to ensure that we have the necessary resources. To ensure that we have the necessary resources. To ensure that we have the necessary resources for WASH-up, which are to retain their knowledge of ethical principles that has been torn apart in recent decades. We have renewed the educational curriculum, strengthening fundamental competence. We have extended learning and primary and secondary training tests. Reason of my life. You are very fun for the debate. You have all the past ahead.
Ustedes son muy divertidos para el debate, tienen todo el pasado por delante.
It seems that the oligarch, disguised as a godfather, was upset.
Parece que se molestó el oligarca disfrazado de pordiosero.
Yes, I would be very good for that, but I'd be here in a ball.
Sí, seré muy pordiosero, pero les gané por goleada a ustedes en un balotaje.
Ordering the economy, security, and streets allowed us to move forward with the other changes that the country demanded screams. Pre-deficit state companies have gone to be in balance, meaning a savings for all Argentines. I take, for example, the emblematic case of Aerolíneas Argentina, which since 2008 our arrival cost $8,000 million to all Argentines, and this year generated earnings for $100 million. So look for an angle, Kika. It seems so the accounting states did not say the same thing over and over again. They did not know how to read. They did not know how to look at a number. Thank you for confirming it. Go and read the balances, ma'am. In this same line, we have advanced with the first privatizations contemplated in the basic law, and we are advancing with the requirements to privatize the remaining ones, thanks to the work of the entire government, but in particular our Minister of Regulation, the Colossus Federico Sturzenegger. Thanks to his cyclop task, I do not know if they will understand his cyclop was.
Gracias a su ciclopia tarea. Uy, no sé si ellos entenderán quién era cíclope.
Thanks to Federico's enormous task, we have carried out more than 14,500 regulations in an endless of areas that account for the degree of corporate co-option that the state had. Because behind each regulation there was a privilege, or rather job. Among other things, these regulations have allowed us to set records in the passenger air trade market. They has allowed Argentine producers to access better production machinery than the available locally, and has normalized and enhanced the rental market. The latter after eliminating the ferries. Rent law has seen a strong increase in the rental housing offer and reduced its price by 30% in real terms. I tell you, Kuka, because as you are so ignorant in real terms, it is not of inflation. In turn, we have dismantled the sinister license system for imports. Thanks to the elimination of series, the expansion of the carrier, and the drop in tariffs. And all these great achievements seem small alongside the achievement by the RIGI. Through this investment incentive system, we have approved projects for $25 billion that are already in progress, and we are evaluating additional applications for $45 billion. The 32 projects presented are distributed in 11 provinces and will require more than 60,000 direct and indirect job positions. And this is only in 1 year of efficiency. Imagine if we sustain this policy over time, even more so considering that a good part of the current investments are developing a critical infrastructure that will make even more future investments viable. Already due to its current results, we are facing the most effective development policy of the century. And it is a vocation of this management to transform the RIGI not into an exception, but into a state policy that will make us the most attractive country in the region to invest. In other words, the goal is not that the RIGI converges the rest of the economy, but that the rest of the economy may eventually have the same treatment as the RIGI. At the same time, we have managed to reduce the state plant by 20%. We have reduced the public administration's higher positions by almost 40%, saving $2 billion a year to society without affecting the quality of a single service or competition. We have also returned to the expectation of the RIGI. We have also returned to the balance of the majority of state companies. At the same time, change of place, please, but of course, he had with difficulty. He did not know what it is like to move a ravioli within an organogram. At the same time, this allowed us to move forward with the elimination of taxes, such as the country tax, protections against regional economies and different productive chains. We have also reduced the perception of IVA and of goodness and the importation of basic goods, clothes, fabrics, appliances, ties, motorcycles, industrial supplies, fertilizers, herbicides, and electronic products. We have lowered internal taxes on cars and motorcycles. We have lowered internal taxes on cars and motorcycles. Tax for hybrid and electric cars. Tariffs on cell phones and internal taxes on electronic products and the internal insurance tax. Now it is only necessary that the provinces and municipalities do their part, for which we have facilitated a tool to denounce excessive taxes by checking it on a page. At the same time, we have just approved the REMI for medium-sized investments. That will enhance the expansion of much of the country's GDP, allowing them to quickly amortize the purchase of capital assets. This measure was approved as part of the labor reform, which will modernize labor regulation among our country for the first time in more than 50 years. According to the present dynamism, at the order of justice, we have promulgated the law on the reiteration and the remission, the law on the absence of trial. And last week, we have again sent the bill for the new juvenile penal regime to Congress. In the order of justice, we have promulgated the law of reiteration and reincidence, the law of trial in absence, and in the last few weeks we have sent again to Congress the bill of law of the new juvenile penal regime. At the same time, we have managed to implement the accusatory system in 65% of the country, and we are on the way to implement it throughout the territory. All this we have done in order to recover the role of law and improve the times of justice, given that a justice that takes years for justice is nothing. In short, all this was a coordinated effort of the multi-employees of state failure to avoid the catastrophe, and it was thanks to eliminating the tax deficit and the monetary emissions that we managed to pass from an inflation that closed in 2023 above 200% and traveled the speed of 17,000 annualized to an inflation that ended in 2025 around 30%. And all this without sending the economy to a mega recession, but returning to the path of economic growth.
todo esto sin enviar a la economía a una mega recesión, sino volviendo a retornar al sendero de crecimiento económico.
Thus, in 2024, and I clarify well, sir, that you can see what the indicator that I am using is the economic activity measured by the monthly station, the MIGRI, by 6.6% point. That is December 24 against December 23.
Creció un 6,6% punta a punta, es decir, diciembre 24 contra diciembre 23.
While during 2025 the growth was 3.3%, so it has been 2 years in a row that the economy grows and accumulates an improvement of more than 10%.
Y acumula una mejora de más del 10%.
This is, we are getting out of the pit, and what is most important, all this we achieved without expropriations, artificial, nor hyperinflations that would have led to poverty to 90% of Argentinians.
Estamos saliendo del pozo. Y lo que es más importante, todo esto lo logramos sin expropiaciones ni default, ni hiperinflaciones que hubieran llevado a la pobreza al 90% de los argentinos.
All this was just the result of facing with seriousness the management of the state, respecting property rights and returning freedom to Argentinians.
Respetando los derechos de propiedad y devolviéndole la libertad a los argentinos.
Daucanya, if you are the representation of the workers, you know that we would have a very serious problem because you are not more than 5%.
Del Caño, si vos fueras la representación de los trabajadores, ¿sabés qué? Tendríamos un problema muy grave, porque ustedes no son más que el 5%. ¿Qué te pasa, Chilindrina?
What's wrong with Chilindrina Trotska? What's wrong with Chilindrina Trotska? Because I can't hear her.
Dale, seguí llorando.
Come on,
Chilindrina,
keep
dale.
crying, Chilindrina, come on.
Dicho esto,
Having said this, we cannot make a true description of the state of the nation without first addressing the leftovers generated by sector of politics. You, her business partners and media that resist the change in the during last year did everything possible to overthrow this government, and it went wrong.
que se resisten al cambio y que durante el año pasado hicieron todo lo posible para derrocar a este gobierno y le salió mal.
Having managed to get out of the storm during the first year, with the huge sacrifice made by Argentinian society, the conditions were set for an economy in which our country could grow strongly, since at the beginning of the year the economy would expand to a rate of 6% and accelerate toward 8%.
Dadas para una economía en el que nuestro país pudiera crecer fuertemente, ya que a inicios del año la economía se expandía a una tasa del 6% y se aceleraba camino al 8%.
However, the opposition was willing to do anything to return to power, while the executive power, for the first time in history, enters an electoral year adjusting the fiscal policy and tightening the monetary system.
Entraba un año electoral ajustando la política fiscal y apretando la monetaria.
The opposition wanted to use all kinds of resources to destroy the economic plan.
Para destruir el plan económico.
The first attack was during the month of March, prior to the agreement with the IMF, which caused the first peak of uncertainty that was translated into rising the risk of the country, rising interest rates, rising inflation and a stagnation of investment.
Punte la inflación y un estancamiento de la inversión.
However, we overcame this setback and the inflation rate for the month of May fell by 1.5%.
Al 1,5%.
However, in that month, after our victory in the city elections, an unprecedented attack in Argentinian history began and took its highest point after the September elections in the province of Buenos Aires.
Historia argentina y que tomó su punto más alto luego de las elecciones del mes de septiembre en la provincia de Buenos Aires.
Something that opponents in their own made them dream of hacking Rivadavia's chair.
Lo hacía soñar con abrazar el sillón de Rivadavia.
That attack, coordinated between the Congress of the nation, sanctioning irresponsible laws, some means of communication with operations and deceits of all kinds to confuse the electorate, and some business sectors a bet on a devaluation to benefit at the expense of the poor, generated a level of uncertainty in society few times seen, only comparable to the panic of the return of the culturismo in August 2019 and the crisis of 2001. Where politics had no problem in throwing one or all the dead on the street that were necessary in order to return to power. Without going further, this was clear in statements of the last few days by Governor Quintela and Senator Regional Mario Florencia Lopez, who are from you, coupists, who have not only been denounced by prosecutor Estornelli, but who himself has reopened the cause for the events that happened in 2001. Let us hope that justice advances not only on the possible acts of sedition, but also on those who could be its direct and indirect beneficiaries of such actions. In this context of political uncertainty, the country's risk, never better known as the Kirker risk, was shot down, which led to the fall of the demand for assets. Lo cual derivó en una and assets called in pesos. While the peso was attacked by the equivalent of 50% of M2O, that is, about $41 billion, the interest rate flew through the air. Activity stopped dry, and the fall in the transactional demand of pesos made the inflation rate accelerate. It is clear that this coupist adventure was not free. According to our estimates, 2.5 points of growth were lost. That is, the Kirker risk also cost us $25 billion in terms of GDP. In this coupist context, yes, coupists, we had, thanks to our great success in foreign policy, a key ally. Contexto golpista, sí, golpista, tuvimos gracias a nuestro gran acierto en materia de política exterior un aliado clave. For the first time in history, and as a result of the special relationship that today characterizes the link between the United States and Argentina, the government of Donald Trump came to help in our country. And that help was not for economic reasons, but to defend ourselves against the destabilizing blow of the representatives of the old regime. And not you, the coupists of always. However, no, it is that I have no problem in accepting the facts as they are. I do not fight with data like you. Aceptar los hechos como son. Yo no me peleo con los datos como ustedes. O sea. However, it was impossible to immediately remedy all the damage caused, a damage done not to the government, but to the Argentine people. You had to endure once again the harmful consequences of the ambition and power of politicians. And it is even more, despite the attacks, we were able to sustain and produce the reduction of poverty, passing from an inherited level of 57% after honestly reporting the prices that the previous government oppressed, to a rate of around 30% in terms of our management. Thank you, Minister Paravilo. Although we are still far from the goal in terms of poverty, these facts fill us with pride and hope. But I want to tell you that this period of malaria has ended. The malaria has ended. The society has been inoculated on October 26 of last year. Today, as this period of extraordinary sessions has shown, which culminated a few days ago, in which we approved some of the most important reforms of the last decades, we have the most reformist Congress in history and the enough strength to face any political coup that the agents of the active change want to carry out. In addition, for continuing with the logic of the speech, I want to thank the Chamber of Deputies, the Chamber of Senators, for the enormous work they have done, both those who accompanied us and those who sabotage and want to sink the country. Because I am president for the 47.5 million Argentinians. On the other hand, today we are at the gates of a great economic resurgence. But growing requires a set of fundamental prerequisites that we must ensure. The first and fundamental requirement is to guarantee the basic macroeconomic conditions, which has been the great task of our first 2 years of management. For this, it is no more important than to continue defending with one incident of fiscal balance, have a restrictive monetary policy that allows us to end inflation once and for all. The first will allow us to continue lowering the country risk, therefore the rate in dollars, while the second will make it possible for the nominal rate in pesos to drop when the relative price distortion caused by inflation decreases. Note that this derives from a better allocation of resources and from an endogenous drop in the interest rate that leads to a greater accumulation of capital, greater productivity, higher salaries, and lower levels of poverty and indigency. In fact, the decrease in spending that allowed us to lower both explicit and implicit taxes derives from greater economic freedom and therefore greater levels of prosperity. Second, we have the long-term growth drivers, supported in 3 simultaneous pillars. The first pillar is the deregulation of the economy. This policy of terminating regulations is not only a way to restore property rights, but also to free growing yields, which are the basis of economic growth. If we do not eliminate this point, everything else will be in vain. The second pillar is human capital. The productivity of a nation and its projection towards a future rests on the backs of a citizen, properly nourished, educated, and protected. Without food, there is no correct cognitive development. You cannot educate and you cannot be an active participant in the economy. Therefore, children are an absolute priority of this government. What a paradox. What a paradox that we should put children first, when the original leader said that the privileged will be the children, and the only thing they did was to put 7 out of 10 under poverty. The process of discovery and coordination that leads to economic growth is uncertain.
El proceso de descubrimiento y coordinación que conduce al crecimiento económico es incierto.
Today, we do not know for sure what the industries of the future will be in 10, 20, or 50 years. Therefore, we must count on a citizen with the capacity to decide for himself, how to organize his physical and mental capacities, and we must also give him the tools to make these decisions. Finally, the third pillar of growth comes from the hand of commercial opening. For almost a century, Argentina has been trapped in the trap of the industrialist fittest. They told us that the only way to generate jobs was to have a heavily subsidized industrial scheme.
fuertemente subsidiado.
They told us that we could only grow if we lived with what we had. To have this legacy, the development of the agro and the regional economies was actively prevented with the restrictions at a time when trade was limited with all kinds of restrictions, as well as the importations that cost all the local industrial supplies. And as if all this were not enough, we must not stop adding a tax burden, which has made almost every type of investment impossible. However, after decades of protection, we obtained a small industry, expensive, dependent on subsidies and with salaries in requisite dollars. First the data, poet, first the data. We have tripled the salary in dollars, poet.
Hemos triplicado el salario en dólares, poeta.
What a party Milton Friedman would have with these caverns, for God's sake.
Haría Milton Friedman con estos cavernícolas, por Dios.
No, that's what you do, that you pay, let's say, merchants. In light of the debate that took place during the last few weeks,
Que pagan, digamos, militantes.
I want to take a few minutes to make the position of the government very clear,
Durante las últimas semanas,
and what the idea of morality as a state policy means.
para dejar bien en claro la posición del gobierno
In this sense, I have not had the opportunity to talk to you.
como política de Estado.
In this sense, I have not had any reference to point out as thieves
Alguno en señalar como ladrones
to a group of local businessmen as a result of their commercial share.
comercial.
That is, if a law at a happen in Sodoma allows you to steal,
En Sodoma permite robar, el
the fact that it is legal does not make it moral.
ilícito. Así
Thus, when a legal framework is against natural law,
al derecho natural, esto es
that is, the right to life, to freedom into property,
propiedad, donde el
where the state becomes the main violator of the principle of non-aggression
del principio de no agresión y de los intercambios
and free trade, we are facing a legal and legitimate framework.
legítimo. Obviamente,
Obviously, businessmen cannot buy privileges
no pueden comprar privilegios que los
that corrupt politicians like he do not sell.
a la venta.
That is, both are accomplices of corruption,
La corrupción y la mayor
and the greatest responsibility falls on politicians.
políticos. Sin embargo,
However, the question is very simple.
es muy simple,
The question is very simple.
simple. Alguien quiere
Someone wants to continue as an impoverished model where only corrupt politicians and businessmen, friends of power,
los amigos del poder.
at the expense of their Argentinians of good.
Entiendo que para
I understand that for a handful of corrupts the answer is yes.
demás está
What is more, that for this government the answer is no.
si pensáramos
If we think in terms of political utilitarianism, the answer is clear.
que beneficiar
Since benefiting a handful of people,
a casi
harming almost 48 million Argentinians, the account should be clear. That is why the fire defense of populists is surprising
populistas
in favor of the protection of the subsidized national industry,
nacional subsidiada, la cual
which makes it clear that they are accomplices of the looting of Argentinians.
muchos
Many politicians, when they publicly insulted some of the industrialists,
industriales
they did it to negotiate higher kickback, not to reject it.
no para rechazarla.
Or do you think it is normal to pay a ton of steel?
O
For $4,000 when you can pay $1,400,
la tonelada de tubo de acero, $4,000.
and that if you do not access said capriccio, he threatened to advance the payment of dividends
Se amenaza
to try to hack the exchange market.
dividendos para intentar poner en
Now you are corrupt politicians who sell favors to corrupt businessmen,
No, ustedes
and you benefited,
corruptos que
you and the corrupt businessmen at the expense of all Argentinians.
ustedes se beneficiaban, ustedes y los empresarios corruptos a costa de todos los argentinos. ¿O
Or do you think this is good to pay for tires
acaso les parece bien pagar los neumáticos
that are 3 or 4 times more expensive
contra la
against the extortion of throwing 920 workers into the street,
a la calle mientras
while the protection for the aluminum sector is negotiated? Or do you think it is good to pay basic
¿O acaso
$50 when the import costs
la
$5?
remera básica $50 cuando la importada cuesta 5?
Obviously, the sectorial response is not so dull. We talk about indiscriminate opening, while when you look at the coefficient of opening foreign trade, Argentina is the closest country in the world, by far for its GDP level. You can see it in the May Council. Not only that, in the opening ranking of the World Bank, Argentina is in the 178th place of 179 countries. What indiscriminate opening are you talking about? You are talking about defending the privileges of the suhantes. Now let's move on to the analysis of economic efficiency. One of the big lies that have been instilled in us is that opening the economy will lose jobs. In the Argentine case, despite what the professionals of the lie repeat during our management, not only did it not increase unemployment, but also this happened in a context where the number of people looking for work increased. The analysis is very simple. When one opens the economy, that allows consumers to get better quality goods at a low price. Obviously, if the local company cannot compete, it breaks down and fires people. However, that is part of the story. The other part is that now the consumer saves money by buying imported goods, and that money will be used to buy other goods, thus generating jobs in another sector of the economy, which is more productive and therefore will be able to pay higher salaries. In short, salaries increase and prices are lower. More is consumed and well-being increases. 48 million Argentines earn and a few lose. Businessmen who are inefficient and corrupt politicians. Except for this creep of power, the rest all line. Finally, there is the most important dimension, which is the moral dimension. The problem with protection, pre-sale and state corruption is that it is wrong. Restricting freedom in stealing is wrong. Restricting trade is to seize the freedom to dispose of the money that a person has earned with the sweat of his forehead. In addition, commercial restriction allows that abusively one should pay a much higher price than that of the market. And even that this is possible only by the violent action of the state. This constitutes robbery. In fact, the fact that it is legal does not make it legitimate, but makes the politician a traitor to the country. In fact, if the politician charges for granting this privilege, this implies a case of corruption. Otherwise, they go and check the cause of the head of the gang. Therefore, our approach to commercial opening is based on a moral foundation that points out that restricting freedom is wrong, stealing is wrong, and corruption is wrong. In addition, our policy promotes efficiency, which means high salaries and lower prices, more consumption both present and future, and therefore greater well-being. Finally, and as if all this were not enough, the living conditions of almost 48 million human beings improve, and only the inefficient and the criminals lose. Therefore, this shows not only the superiority of our policies, but also the principle of revelation that shows us who the enemies of the Argentinians are. Now applying this moral heuristic, which is the one that guides our action,
que es la que guía nuestro accionar,
and having in mind what are the three requirements that an economy needs to grow,
economía para crecer,
we have a truly historic opportunity before us in this year, 2026,
26, y que
and which brings with it a change of perspective for those we govern.
gobernamos.
The success of a stabilization plan is measured in months, even in years,
Incluso en años,
but the state policies that Argentina needs are measured in decades.
en décadas.
That is the horizon we need to look at today.
Mirar hoy,
It is time to embrace morality again as a state policy,
Estado, dado que
given that it is what has made us great at the end of the 19th century and will make us great again. The mandate that society gave us cannot be clearer. The Congress and the nation have never had administration as reformist as this one. For 100 years, our country has been carrying false consensus,
el mandato que
and we have not been able to make a change.
no puede ser más claro.
We have not been able to make a change.
Una composición
We have not been able to make a change.
desde hace
For 100 years, our country has been carrying false consensus and formulas that took us from being a prosperous country to a poor country and left us in December 2023 at the brink of the worst crisis in our history. This year, we will examine the institutional legal organization that brought us here and build a new architecture, the architecture that the Argentine state will have in the next 50 years, having the Western morality as a state policy. It is the time for vision. It is the time to think as a nation, and not only as a government. It is time to embrace state policy for the first time in a century, and that these policies give the Argentines the ability to dream of a better future for them and for their children. It is our true task and our true mandate. The past governments destroyed the respect for property rights in our country, but property rights are the cornerstone of the entire economy, and that is why we will deepen the necessary reforms to safeguard it. Thus, we will fight this anomaly with the reform of the Civil and Commercial Code, the Civil and Commercial Process Code, and a package of laws destined to protect the fundamental rights of the Argentines, of those who only know how to live from what is foreign, including the credit that establishes the defense of the consumer and the competition. In addition, we will send to Congress projects that will sweep with a mountain of regulatory chains and will give free rein to the investment and industries that are now dead, so that they can produce, innovate, and generate employment. But that is not enough. We also have to reform our impositive scheme. As we have said so many times, we need low taxes, because the tax system has to serve growth.
Para galvanizar todas estas reformas, vamos a seguir profundizando en materia de apertura económica y acuerdos comerciales.
We will ratify the agreement with the United States, just as we did with the European Union. We will form the code in January to adapt it to our new challenges. And we will also integrate ourselves into the international treaties necessary, because we must sit at the table of international trade. Until we are so relevant, our interests cannot be missiled. And this relevance comes from the use of our resources. That is why we are going to seek to remove the legal barriers that are interposed between society and its wealth. We are going to build a robust legal framework that allows primary development for the benefit of all Argentinians, with care but far from absurd environmental prejudices. And I mean all resources, critical minerals such as copper and lithium, fishing and agriculture, conventional and non-conventional hydrocarbons, regional economies and the agricultural sector. And as politics and institutions are the backbone of growth, we must reform them so that they can support the weight of this future. For too long, politics has been used to weave an expression of mafia, united by a predatory solidarity with the common purpose of living, of what it produces. That's what you do. This is called social justice, to live from the work of others. This includes from the means of communication to public officials, passing through companies and even football. Politics for us must be again put to service by society. That is why we need to reform our electoral system completely, so that representatives are responsible for their representatives. And this also involves reforming how political parties are financed, to provide transparency to the relationships between businessmen and politics. This is the way to eliminate the influence of the mafias and drug trafficking in state affairs. And this also applies to the historical clauses between politics and justice. Justice is locked because it was captured by political disputes outside of its original purpose. That is why we will present projects that will make judicial power a democratic, republican, agile, fast, effective tool, and above all things that are fair. In the end, the only infallible way to avoid the main cause of promiscuity, amiguism and corruption in the state, is to reduce it. The present state, which intends to take charge of all the orders of life, has failed. That is why we need an agile, vocative state, which is free of corruption, 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 agile, vocative state, and a few essential functions synthesized in the defense of life, freedom and property rights, without neglecting elements of the current structure, based on what we define, as Ayn Rand said, the ethics of the emergency. And in order to defend these values, we must go deeper into the security reforms. We must advance step by step in the modification of the criminal code, introducing tougher penalties, and with greater coverage of the effect of pressure. In short, in order to continue advancing in our slogan, the one who does it pays it. As for justice, it must also be transformed. We have already implemented the accusatory system in 65% of the country, increasing the agility of federal courts. Judges that used to last years, today are defined in days, and by the end of a year, the vast majority of the country will be implemented. Now we need to promote the judges by generating federal justice, a healthy practice that has already been incorporated in several provinces. It is healthy because, as Tocqueville said, participating in the jury is a practical score of civil responsibility and respect for the law. It is also a way of subjecting judges to public scrutiny and to the standard that this implies. In times of human capital, we need to reform primary and secondary education. We all know that under the low quality of our education system, the statistics are overwhelming. That is why, during our governments, schools will serve their original purpose of giving our children the tools so that they can look forward to a better future, not to indoctrinate them. We cannot be a defenseless country in the face of external threats, in a world that requires more and more preparation. That is why we will continue to strengthen our armed forces and elevate our defense capabilities to the standards that the geopolitical context demands. In this sense, we have already initiated a sustained and responsible process of recovery and modernization of the military instrument. After decades of degeneration, we have carried out the historic modernization of military equipment through the incorporation of 24 F-16 aircraft, mountain helicopters and Stryker vehicles, among others. A defense system according to the threat of the present is the shield that needs the prosperity that we are going to build as a nation. Thank you very much. Today, Deputy Petri. These radical reforms of the state are not optional. Today, a new world order is being configured, and the way in which we insert ourselves in it will determine the fate of our country. Come on, go and defend Cuba, North Korea, and all the major communists who killed 150 million human beings. Come on.
Que mataron a 150 millones de seres humanos. Dale.
The era of global cooperation, without a single blow, has come to an end. We enter a new era of great nations that compete to join vertical value chains. And in this world, the waters between the free nations and the underprivileged nations will increasingly break. Times of change require a correct diagnosis, a calibrated moral compass, and the courage to act. Without morals, you end up being a common cause with dictatorships. Without patience, you end up going against history. This cannot happen again. In this new world, the two most important capitals that a nation can have are its resources and its location. Argentina has both, but our advantage is not just resources, it is cohesion. When I talk about human capital, I talk about people. You cannot be so ignorant. Your ignorance says. Thank you. No, I never heard this. Sorry, Gary Becker. Sorry if you heard what this lady said. We have the critical minerals that the West needs. We have energy, gas, oil, nuclear energy, and renewable energy. The supply chains of scale production. We have land, water, and agro-industrial capacity to guarantee food security in the hemisphere. And we have the location, the southern end of the continent, with 12 oceans, and the presence of Antarctica. We are a natural link of the strategic value chain at the West. Of course, you who surrendered to Venezuela and to the terrorists in Iran, who put 2 bombs in us, were the corrupt also, signed a memorandum, and came to explain to me what happened to Nisman. Come on. Freedom. 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 As a government, we have had a great success. We were the first in the region to set up a flag. Argentina has already led the train of history past twice. In the Second World War, unneutrality cost us decades of marginality. With the no to the ALCA, we will let out have the greatest cycle of economic expansion of human history. And in the meantime, we implemented the most anti-export regime on the planet. Today we have 30% of the world's population on the GDP, when we should have one that is triple, about 93%. They are numbers at shame, and they cannot happen again. This also applies in defense. The South Atlantic is the strategic to speed field of the next decades. Commercial routes, natural resources, moral sovereignty, and human rights. Who controls it? Will control a key part of global work. Argentina has to be the actor. The F-16s already guard our airspace, and we will send a package of laws to strengthen coordination between security forces and intelligence. But all this requires a lasting strategic alliance, and that is what we are buzzing in North America. This is not only an agreement between President Trump and President Milei. It has to do with the cultural affinity and strategic objectives between two countries and the whole region. This is what allowed us to renegotiate with the International Monetary Fund to save a changing crisis, to increase our foreign trade, and to boost the wave of foreign investment in the region. It is time to make this a state policy. We have to create the century of the Americas, make America great again. From Alaska to Tierra del Fuego, let's make Argentina and America great again. And as greatness requires time to become a reality, now I want to anticipate how the country we are going to is going to look like. Argentina is experiencing several virtuous processes. The first one is energy. Last year we exported $80,000 million in total. In 5 years, we will export in 5 years, which was paid by the triple and was carried away by the difference. Trop manga. That's why they defend Picharito so much. That's why they defend Chacharin so much. From the expensive tubes. If you hadn't been breaking everything, we would have been a great country since the end of the 19th century. In 5 years, the energy complex, iron will be exporting $50,000 million. This is not an expectation as a country that we are going to export. This is not hope, but a reality. The great Niquim, in a few years, will be another of the Argentine metropolis. I want to tell you that many other cities have the same potential. The mining will be producing hundreds of thousands of jobs. In fact, if it weren't for caverns, I'd here, and if we did things not like a great feat, but like Chile does, the Cordillera would give us 1 million real jobs to cover the atrocities in terms of employment. I want Argentine producing, not Argentine parasites. But this boom is not just news for the energy sector. This is the base of a realization never seen before. The cheap energy is the transversal consumption that changes the industrial location equation. Where there's abundant and cheap energy, the heavy industry is installed. We will see the petrochemical, the hydroelectric, the aluminum, where not the concrete, the hydrogen production, the processing of lithium and critical minerals, and we will see data centers that create natural energy and create unique conditions for the infrastructure of artificial intelligence. Outside of the huge human capital, we have to respond to this demand. Many fear that tomorrow's Argentina will lack jobs, but not us. New industries will supply the demand for jobs. We're tied by old industries, and with much better salaries. If they only review Adam Smith's work, they would know that the division of work is determined by the size of the market. If they internalize once and for all the budget restriction, they will understand that there is a financial limit to the investment, and death just in case, A delinquent belief that it can be financed with money. It would collide with the physical restriction that human beings only have 24 hours a day, which makes senseless. The apocalyptic scenarios. 30 like Adam Smith, 30 like the argument about the hatred of the Henry Hazlitt machine, as is in the economy, in an election that destroys it. The little fallacy that you salute. Do you hate Bashar? Okay, don't get in trouble. Look at the numbers and you will realize that if the technical progress generates unemployment, that logic after the Industrial Revolution implies that unemployment in the world would be 90%. Look at the data and you will see that there is no apocalypse. I'm going to explain it to you easily. From the Industrial Revolution, the population multiplied by 10 on the planet. If for ignorant peace that are here saying that if they were right, there would not have been one more job, then there would have been unemployment at least of that 10% of the population. Therefore, there would be unemployment of 90%, and you would be doubling the votes to the representation that you aspire. And all this would be accompanied by the privatization of our cargo rail system. In 1 year, we will have the whole network experimenting its largest modernization in more than a century. The sector will also have its revolution. We are in conditions to produce 300 million tons of grain, doubling the current production. For this, we will give a property rights regime to the sea innovators. We will continue the path of low retention responsibly, and only in the measure that the superior and fiscal allows. And the incentive regime for medium-sized investments would catalyze the current flow of capital and irrigation systems. We cannot accept that our yields in Chaco are 600 kilos of cotton per hectare, when in Brazil they are 1,400. We cannot allow that Brazil triples its soy production using seedware, Argentine technology, made by Argentine companies that cannot be sold in Argentina. Imposed by these sectors, the financial sector will expand, which, helped by the law of fiscal innocence, begins to walk the path to duplicated size. As a result of all these virtuous processes, a new sense of national pride will be generated, supported in what Argentines can do, not in what politicians say the state should do. What patience you have. With him, G-Sync, the data centers will work. It can't be that they are so dumb. This country is already being built, despite the outbreak of that part of the policing that intends to stop it. That's why what will determine our parliamentary agenda is how fast we go and how far we get. We have the strength and ideas to change the country definitively, and the conviction and tenacity to make it concrete. We have the support of the people, who has done more than fail, and in every election, he shows that he doesn't want to try any of his stupid ideas. But at the same time, we also have an unfair adversary. I'm talking about you, an adversary who is going to break all the rules that he himself created in order to stop this change of era. In turn, I tell you that each of the ministries is prepared 10 packages as structural reforms, so every month we will present a package of projects to be taken up by this Congress corresponding to the verticals of change that we have explained today. This will be the calendar year of this reform, 9 months, uninterrupted of structural reforms that will redesign the institutional architecture of the new Argentina. Some will say that 90 packages of structural reforms in the year is excessive, dictatorial or whatever. In front of this, I want to put out the following. Our reformist ambition cannot be understood as an attempt to accumulate power. It will never be a let's go for everything. Because precisely the recipe that Argentina needs to prosper is the reduction of the size of the state, which means a reduction of the power of the politician, whoever the politician is. We always said it, and it is time to repeat it now. We did not ask people for the fight to give us power, but to return power to them. It is time to become a mature nation. Wesain. I want now to read a few words sent to me yesterday by one of the greatest economists on the planet, Professor Jesus Huerta Soto. There are moments in history in which a nation must choose its future. We've been told that the state is our protector, that the bureaucrat is our savior, and that the politician knows more than the free man, that we must obey, that we must depend. But the truth is different. The world only has two types of people: those who live from what others produce, that is, the parasites, that is, you, and those who produce everything that modern life makes possible. While you write regulations, we create wealth. While you promise equality, we generate prosperity. While you distribute poverty, we multiply abundance. The true battle of our time is cultural, philosophical, and moral. It is to choose a system that takes millions out of poverty. It is to be a nation, to stop being an immature nation that dilapidates the future, to spread benefits in the present, and make us a mature nation that plans the rules of play so that there is present in future, and so that every citizen can freely choose their own destiny, not that an ignorant, fatally arrogant bureaucrat wants to determine it. To govern with responsibility is to govern for today's Argentinians, but also to govern for tomorrow's Argentinians. It is time to create the institutional and legal architecture for the next 50 years. These new roles of play that will leave in the past, once and for all, the unforgettable process that has been our last century of history. Our country is coming out of adolescence, entering a new era that will be the first of its kind, and the first of its kind that will be the first. And our child coming out of adolescence entering a new period, and so we consecrate this year as the year of Argentinian greatness. This is the proposal for this Congress to legislate at the height of Argentinian greatness. We will do our part, and you will have to do yours. Like our dear Minister of Economy, there are moments in history in which history changes. This is that moment. We, those who are sitting here today, are the protagonists of this moment. I invite you to think of your names engraved in stone as that generation that changed the destiny of our country.
Los invito a pensar en sus nombres grabados en piedra, como aquella generación que cambió el destino de nuestra patria.
With these words, I inaugurate the period of Ordinary Sessions number 144 of the Honorable Congress of the Nation.
Con estas palabras, doy por inaugurado el periodo de sesiones ordinarias número 144 del Honorable Congreso de la Nación.
Thank you very much to everyone. May God bless the Argentinians. May the forces of heaven accompany us. Long life freedom, damn it. Long life freedom, damn it. Long life freedom, damn it. Let's make Argentina great again. Thank you very much.